If only it were Chadwick, by Louis Buss. The scrutiny of the handwritten inscriptions found in a 1935 edition of the book Self-Realisation, bought on eBay, takes the author on a journey of inspiration and expectation. Continued from the March-April issue. Part 6. The trail goes cold. If a conventional type like me finds Chadwick's presence at Bhagavan's side reassuring, Brunton's is slightly unsettling. He seems to have been involved in some rum goings on in his youth, and a whiff of the occult hung around him till the end of his days. Unlike Chadwick, he did apparently set himself up as a guru, or was at any rate regarded as one by a few people, some of whom eventually became disillusioned with him. With his name changes, his love of magic, and his cavalier attitude to the truth, he comes across as a sort of spiritual mountebank, full of tall stories and miracles, but ready to pack up his tent and melt away at the first sign of trouble. Everything that is slightly suspect about him is epitomized for me by the goatee beard he affected in later life, which made him look like nothing so much as a music hall hypnotist. Yet Brunton's faults somehow only serve to make his genuine regard for Bhagavan all the more touching, in that at least he was utterly sincere, and anyone who doubts it need only read the article he wrote in his later years, saying that his first meeting with Bhagavan was as fresh in his mind as if it had happened yesterday, and generally leaving no doubt that through all his adventures Bhagavan had remained the guiding light of his life. One is left feeling that, like all of us, Brunton was ennobled by his contact with Ramana Maharshi. If he had never made that fateful first trip to Arunachala, he might have remained all his life a mere peddler of wonders. Thanks to Bhagavan, he became something far greater than that. He became a devotee. So, ultimately, just as much as Chadwick, Brunton too was one of us. Devotion to Bhagavan was his redeeming feature, just as it is mine, and even his worst faults appear somehow endearing in the light of that love. All the same, I hope I have said enough to explain my feeling that a book sent home by Brunton in 1936 would be quite different sort of find from one sent by Chadwick. In fact, the evidence for the Brunton hypothesis was never very strong. True, he was about the right age to have had parents still alive, and he might conceivably have been in the ashram when the book was sent. Also, like Brunton, the mystery devotee had referred to Bhagavan as the Maharishi. Beyond that, there was almost nothing in his favor. Although he made some extended visits, I am not sure if Brunton would ever have described the ashram as the place in which he was living. And if he was sending a book home from there to his parents, why should he have specifically drawn their attention to the two chapters that were based on his own most famous work? Why not just send them a search in secret India and let them read all about it in their son's own words? Come to that, was it really possible to imagine that Brunton's parents had not already read his celebrated book? And if they had, why should they have felt such a compelling need to tell them about Bhagavan and convince them of his greatness? Surely he would have gone through all that with them years before on his return from his momentous first visit. The more we threw the idea around, the less likely the Brunton hypothesis appeared. Then a bit of digging on the internet uncovered a thesis on Brunton which contained the following words: "The 4 months of summer 1936 were devoted to a unique experience, a retreat in complete solitude in the heart of Himalayas." So that was that. At the time, our mystery devotee had been walking home from the temple each night to meditate with Bhagavan in the old hall. Poor old Brunton had already been off on another of his adventures. This put him even more categorically out of the running than Chadwick. The field of possible candidates for mystery devotee was already starting to look decidedly ragged. Grant Duff and Evans Wentz were considered but quickly ruled out on the basis that they had been fairly old men themselves by 1936 and so would probably not have had parents at home in England. Duncan Greenless was more the right sort of age, but seemed to have made his first visit in October 1936, just slightly too late to have sent the book in August, and much too late to have got into the mystery devotee's settled daily routine. In any case, he seems to be one of those who had a low opinion of Brunton, so would have been unlikely to draw his parents' attention specifically to the 2 chapters based on his work. The field was getting thinner and thinner. M.A. Piggott, and I would have been rather pleased if it had been her, and Prince Hopkins had been there at the right sort of time, and Talks mentions somebody called Knowles who came for darshan in 1935. We knew so little about these people that I despaired of ever determining whether or not the mystery devotee had been one of them. Then there was always the possibility that it had been someone completely unknown to ashram posterity, some Western resident so unassuming and humble that he had managed to live there for months or years without ever cropping up in any of the literature. Of course, there was one other way of finding out. So far, we had been searching, so to speak, at the ashram end. We hadn't yet tried looking in England and tracing the history of the book that way. So I contacted the eBay seller, who seemed to be a professional book dealer, and asked her what she knew. It turned out that she had bought the book from a friend, who I seem to remember was in his later years. This gentleman had amassed a large collection of books about India, yoga, the martial arts and similar subjects, and now needed to sell a lot of them off because he was moving house. She thought it very unlikely that he would remember where he had picked up Self-Realisation, but said that she would ask him and let me know. All in all, this hardly sounded optimistic. The collector obviously hadn't been a devotee of Ramana Maharshi or even remotely interested in him, because otherwise he would certainly have held on to a book as unusual as this. From the sounds of it, he had been the sort of person who picked up lots of books from second-hand shops, and yes, probably from jumble sales. If he had obtained this one from such a source, there seemed no hope of tracing it back, even assuming he managed to remember the exact time and place of its purchase. The trail, as it does at a certain point in all the best thrillers, seemed to have gone cold. For several weeks, the book remained in pride of place in the corner where I have gathered everything I own connected with Bhagavan, feeling that it was more of a relic or a museum exhibit than an ordinary book. I had bought it a special perspex stand and placed it proudly on display. After 75 years of mistreatment and indignity, the old campaigner was finally getting the respect that it deserved. It now seemed to show off its coffee ring and other scars with a certain quiet pride, like a returning war hero in a victory parade. The other items nearby might have been chosen specifically to make it feel at home. There were a couple of little reddish stones I had picked up near Skandashram on my first visit to Arunachala in 2009. The mountain itself was represented in a picture from the ashram bookshop and a little black relief bought from one of the local carvers. There was a tiny box containing packets of vibhuti. On the shelf below the book, between two large volumes of restored photographs, was a small, framed, willing bust. The next shelf down contained all the ordinary books. I mean ordinary, of course, in comparison with the great find. My little Bhagavan library. About all hung a large colored photograph of Bhagavan himself, the one where he is sitting cross-legged on a tiger skin, holding his right foot in his left hand and giving, I suppose one can only call it a smile, though the word seems awfully inadequate. When you try to describe that expression, you realize just how limited the English language is. It is like suddenly realizing that your mother tongue has no proper word for the sun and finding yourself reduced to talking about a big torch or lamp up in the sky. The word smile will never be anything more than an oblique metaphor for the expression on the face of Ramana Maharshi. That smile of his is so enigmatic that it makes the Mona Lisa's look like some painted leer. It is so godly, so gentle, radiant and divine that you sometimes want to give up everything, even practicing his teachings and reading about his life, and spend the rest of your days just staring up at him in idiotic adoration. Over the previous few years, I had fondly assumed that I was assembling this little collection of books and pictures, ashes and stones for my own benefit. The Bhagavan corner of the room was all meant to be about me and my Guru. But now I couldn't help feeling that without my realizing it, I had been driven to do it all in preparation for the arrival of this battered little book. I had been like the keeper of a menagerie, preparing for the delivery of some exotic new specimen, creating an environment as close as possible to that of its distant land. When everything was ready, the mysterious creature had duly appeared and taken its place, like some tiger or falcon from Arunachala, with the pictures and the little stones, a pitiful attempt to recreate the grandeur of its mountain home. But it was a wild thing still, charged with a spiritual power which might wreak havoc if allowed to break out, very different from the tame, artificial items that formed the rest of my collection, for this was a survivor from the ashram of the 1930s, from some mythical age of giants when Ramana Maharshi walked the earth. I could almost have imagined that the arrival of the book had wrought an imperceptible change in that divine expression. Bhagavan seemed even more enigmatic and knowing than ever. It was as if these events, so unexpected and incredible to me, were just moves in a long game which he had planned and anticipated from the start. He knew full well who had originally sent the book. Just as he had known all the vicissitudes it would suffer before finally appearing on eBay and ending up on the bookshelf of an obscure London devotee. I had just been one cog in a complicated machine that Bhagavan had set in motion for reasons of his own. If there was any more of the mystery to be revealed to me, he would make sure I got just the information I needed at just the right time. Continued in the next issue.